Good evening, good evening. It is a great day to be alive in my right mind, and I thank God for it. Also, I have the power because I'm connected to the power source, Jesus. This is Reverend Gooley coming to you today, doing a recap on our mental health support group session on the 17th of this month. And we had two awesome sessions one at 2, the first one, and then at 6. On our 2 o'clock session, we had Alicia Amsler, and she is the founder of Runway to Life. It's a support group where they help people with mental health challenges, especially dealing with domestic violence, and it's a whole list of things they do to try to help people get back on their feet. So it was great having her to come and talk to us. And her topic was the correlation between faith and good mental health. Faith and good mental health. And is that a spiritual, she asked the question, is that a spiritual or mental health thing for her clients? Yes, it's both mental and spiritual health. What are the people dealing with? They're dealing with being alone, generational things that they're dealing with. Um, who's speaking to you, or what's speaking to you, or what's the environment of the person? And so she dealt with that, the correlation between faith and good mental health. And she told me some of the things that they do, how people are coming in suicidal, demonic influence, mental health crisis, family crisis. Also, she mentioned, especially during this pandemic time, how, again, people had to stay in their homes, yet still dealing with the mental health. They weren't able to get out to the facility when when COVID first hit. So again, they had to stay in the home with the person who they're challenged with. And so she talked about all these different things before she can really get into about dealing with depression and anxiety. And so it was really, really awesome. She was talking about get back to God's cycle pattern. So because our lives are so out of order because of sin, and then talking about forgiveness, about recovery being done. So many people in the hospital and the medical industry. So people are going there trying to get help, but forgiveness was a great key. She talked about forgiving people. People have been abused from childhood and adulthood, but have been abused, and they're still holding on, unfortunately, to that abuse. And she was saying you need to forgive that abused person, the person who abused you, because it brings on so many demonic spirits of unforgiveness, of wanting to commit suicide, wanting to hurt others, commit murder, and these things passed on from generation to generation. So it was really, really awesome what she talked about. Question: did the person grow up in dishonor? Does my identity matter? Yes, it matters in Christ, and it matters. And so also, what's feeding our spirit? What's feeding us? What are we looking at? What are we hearing? How we are associated with people. So she talked also about soul ties. She was talking about one minister who had lost a friend, and he was ministering to this person, and eventually the person committed suicide. But he just couldn't get his life together. He kept grieving. I call it, we can call it excessively about that person's demise. but he had a soul tie with a person, not a bad soul tie or anything like that you would think, but he was so close to the person, try to help that person, and he felt like he just failed that person. But we cannot change a person's mind. And so he had to come to the realization that he had a soul tie with that person and he had to let it go. So it was an awesome session. So God is really blessing us in these different sessions during the month. And then at 6 o'clock, we had Pastor Chris and Lady Millian of First Christian Pentecostal Church in Hopewell, Virginia. And they talked about the effects of COVID and the depression and the anxieties dealing with that, and the church, how they eventually had to, of course, close the church up for a while, and people were really, really challenged, and how they themselves could keep it going and try to encourage the people through this awesome pandemic time. And people felt hopeless. What they did after they closed the church, and they of course did the broadcast, a virtual broadcast. Then he said, his wife said, look at the window. The people had loaded up and circled their area and listened to him on the virtual broadcast, and they had church right out there. He was still in the house, and people listened through their instruments or whatever devices. Then people from the neighborhood heard about it, and people were blessed, and I believe one man in his neighborhood came to know the Lord. So even though the pandemic had altered many things, but as far as the in-person, but it would never offset what God has already planned. But they, again, talked about what they had to have a mindset change, what they had to do dealing with the pandemic, keeping themselves safe, and also trying to keep the people in the church safe. And people felt disconnected somewhat because, of course, with the pandemic. But thank God that he was able to do that particular thing of going virtual and people coming in the neighborhood. So I'm telling you now, even though this pandemic is still going on, it never changes what God has in store. We sort of like change the way we do things. And yes, churches are opening back up all around the world, and people, of course, being very careful, but who knows what the future holds concerning this pandemic. But God is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. Yes, the pandemic affected the church, every industry, every entity, but we as believers, we have to be wise, but the church must go on. So it was good hearing from Pastor Chris and Lady Millian talked about what they had to do as far as dealing with the people mental capacity, the fear that came upon people, and of course they themselves had to keep themselves encouraged. So I'm soliciting you to come on and join us on our monthly meetings with the mental health support group, New Horizon Mental Health Support Group, because God is blessing us greatly. You all heard of my story, how God has blessed me to take what was a liability of my life in earlier years about mental health, and now it's an asset that I use to bless people. How God delivered me, he can deliver you. So we're looking forward for our next session, the last session of 2022 in December. So please contact me. Please, let's get together, because God, as I always say, is just as concerned about our mental health as he is concerned about other parts of our lives. He would have us to prosper, be in health, even as our soul prosper. So pastors, leaders, come on board. help us to do this all to the glory of God. So until December, we'll see you then, and have a great day.